Welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Have you ever encountered people so illogical that you wanted to leave Earth immediately? Well, today, we're diving into 4 of the most absurd stories from Reddit, from entitled customers and inconsiderate relatives to bizarre situations that will leave you both frustrated and laughing at the same time. But that's not all. Today's story will take you on a thrilling journey where justice is no longer a distant dream but unfolds right before your eyes. Are you ready? Which story made you the most outraged? Or have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Comment below and let us know. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss our next stories. And if you have a great story to share, send it our way. Story 1. An entitled customer loses it after being denied a refund for an item he didn't even buy here. Working in retail is already a challenge, but dealing with outrageous customers is a whole different story. Today, I'll share a tale so ridiculous that you won't know whether to be angry or laugh at the sheer absurdity of it. I work at a home appliance store, where every day is a test of patience and problem-solving skills. Most of the time, things go smoothly, customers are reasonable enough. But every now and then, someone walks in and makes me want to scream at the universe. One day, as I was restocking shelves like usual, the store's glass door suddenly creaked open. A middle-aged man walked in, gripping an old, worn-out electric stove that looked like it belonged in a museum. The thick layer of dust covering it was so dense that I could have written my name on it. The exterior was scratched, peeling, and had clearly survived more than a few decades. It carried the weary look of an appliance that had been through way too much. I shuddered slightly but maintained my professional smile. Little did I know, I was about to face one of the most mind-boggling customer encounters of my entire retail career. The man slammed the stove onto the counter, brushed off some of the thick dust, and crossed his arms. His eyes were sharp and commanding, as if he was about to issue an order to the entire world. "I want a refund. This thing is defective," he declared without hesitation. I blinked in surprise, staring at the ancient-looking stove that had clearly seen its fair share of survival battles. But, as a professional, I kept my smile intact and calmly asked, "Sir, when did you purchase this item?" He thought for a moment before casually responding, "About 12 years ago." 12 years ago. My brain momentarily short-circuited. I had expected something like 2 weeks ago or, at most, a few months ago. But 12 years? Not 12 days, not 12 weeks, not even 12 months, 12 years? I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sir, our return policy only applies within a few months to a year. Unfortunately, for products that have been used for 12 years, we can't offer a refund." I figured this explanation was clear enough. But no. He was just getting started. "What? What kind of business are you running here?" He slammed his hand on the counter, making me jump. "I bought items here years ago, and they told me there was a refund policy. Now I come back, and you're refusing me?" I took a deep breath. Did this man really think return policies lasted over a decade? Forcing out my most professional smile, I said, "Sir, yes, we do have a return policy, but it applies to new and used items within the stated time frame. In this case, your stove has been in use for quite a long time now." "So what? It still works." "It's just a little old," he shot back, patting the stove's surface, which sent another cloud of dust flying into the air. I swear, if I inhaled that, I'd be coughing for the rest of my shift. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. 12 years of use, covered in dust, nearly falling apart, and he still thought he could return it? I glanced at my coworker for backup, but he simply shook his head and pretended to be busy with paperwork. I understood. This was my battle to fight. I was no longer sure if he meant a few years ago or actually over a decade ago. His words made me feel like I was trapped in a chaotic timeline where return policies could last for a century. Despite the thousands of question marks in my head, I maintained a professional smile and gently explained, "Sir, this stove is extremely old, and we cannot issue a refund for an item that has been used for such a long time." I thought he would understand. But no! He exploded like a ticking time bomb that had just reached its limit. "I know the law. I have the right to get a refund if the product is defective. This is a scam." His voice boomed through the store like thunder on a clear day. The entire store fell silent, while I just wanted to disappear into thin air. Some customers stopped what they were doing, pretending to browse items while clearly eavesdropping on the drama. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. But before I could respond, he demanded to see the manager immediately, as if I had just committed an unforgivable crime. With no other choice, I sighed and called my manager, hoping to end this ridiculous situation quickly. But guess what? My manager was so shocked that he nearly dropped the clipboard in his hands. And the man? He still wasn't done. His voice grew louder, his arguments more absurd. "Your store sells terrible products. How can a stove break after just 12 years? Back in the day, I bought stoves that lasted 15 years and they still worked fine." I almost burst into tears. "So now, if a stove breaks after 12 years, it's somehow our fault? If this stove could talk, it would probably complain about being wrongfully accused." At this point, my manager decided to look up his purchase history, hoping to find some record to settle this nonsense once and for all. Both of us just wanted something, anything, to put an end to this absurd debate. And then, the ultimate plot twist happened. This stove was not purchased from our store. Not only that, it was from a rival brand. It took me a full 3 seconds to process what had just happened. Meanwhile, my manager stood frozen, staring in disbelief. Then, with a polite but undeniably sarcastic smile, he looked at the man and said, "Sir, this stove was not bought from our store. It belongs to another brand, and I'm certain you purchased it somewhere else." At that moment, a heavy silence fell over the entire store. The man blinked rapidly, looking at us, then at the stove, then back at us again. For a few seconds, I could see his brain struggling to process the information, but clearly failing. Then, out of nowhere, without saying another word, he simply picked up the stove, turned around, and walked straight out the door, as if he had never been there in the first place. No apology. No excuse. No explanation. He vanished like the wind, leaving me, my manager, and dozens of customers who had just witnessed a spectacular performance. And then, the entire store erupted into laughter. Some customers even clapped, while one person joked, "Guess he was just trying his luck." After that day, he never returned to our store again. But I'm absolutely certain, he continued his journey, hopping from store to store, hoping that someone, somewhere, would finally give him a refund for his 12-year-old stove. Story 2. I was so fed up that I finally decided to charge my freeloader brother rent. Family, where we grow up with love, where we seek comfort and support in difficult times. But what happens when a family member not only relies on you but also takes advantage of your kindness time and time again? When love turns into a burden, when help turns into endurance, do you have the strength to finally say, "Enough"? Today, I'll tell you the story of my parasitic younger brother and how I finally stood up for myself to restore fairness in my own home. I'm a 30-year-old man, and I take pride in the fact that I was able to buy a small house with my own hard work. Every day, I work tirelessly, paying off my mortgage, covering utility bills, and taking care of everything from groceries to daily expenses. I've never shied away from hard work, only wishing for a stable and independent life. But that turned out to be harder than I thought, because of one major problem. And that problem wasn't my job, nor was it my mortgage. It came from inside my own house, from my freeloading younger brother, who had been living off me for years without any intention of changing. My brother, 25 years old, unemployed, irresponsible, and broke, yet living in my house like a king. If laziness were a sport, he'd have won a gold medal long ago. I used to think he'd be grateful and take this chance to become independent. But no, he had no intention of changing. Every day, I'd leave for work early in the morning while he remained wrapped in his blanket, sleeping until noon. When he finally woke up, he'd drag himself from the bedroom to the living room, tap on his phone a few times, then bury himself in his computer screen, playing video games for hours. When he got bored of gaming, he'd switch to Netflix, snack on food, and continue this endless cycle of laziness. Everything in this house, electricity, water, internet, food, was paid for by me. And my brother? He didn't feel the slightest guilt. Every month, my electricity bill skyrocketed because he kept the AC on all day, the TV running 24/7, not to mention the internet bill doubling due to his constant game downloads. While I worked my butt off, he lived like a prince, without a care in the world. Every time I brought up the idea of him getting a job, he had a long list of excuses ready. You don't understand. The job market is really tough right now. I'm in the process of figuring out my career path. Don't pressure me. If I get a job now, I won't have time for gaming. Hearing this, all I could do was pinch my temples in frustration. If he wasn't working, then how was he surviving? Oh, right, it was because I was providing for him. But the final straw came on one fateful evening. After a long, exhausting day at work, I dragged myself home, looking forward to a nice meal to fill my empty stomach. I opened the fridge and it was empty. Not just low on food, completely, utterly empty. The meal I had saved from the night before? Gone without a trace. I turned to the living room, and there he was, sitting on the couch, casually eating my food while watching TV, completely unbothered. I clenched my fists, feeling my blood boil. This was the breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. For years, I had been patient, tolerant, and hopeful that he would change. But he never did. Every time I mentioned getting a job, he ignored me or, worse, made excuses to escape responsibility. But today was different. Today, I refused to endure another day. I stormed into his room without knocking, my voice cold as ice. Starting next month, you'll pay rent. If not, you move out. He stared at me like I had just said the most absurd thing in the world. Then he laughed, a mocking, dismissive laugh. You're joking, right? I'm your brother. I crossed my arms and met his gaze without hesitation. No. I'm not joking. This is my house, and you can't stay here for free forever. I expected a moment of realization, a sign that he finally understood. But no. Instead of reflecting, he reacted like a child who had just been denied candy. He jumped up, his voice rising in anger. You're being ridiculous. I'm your family. You're supposed to help me. I let out a dry chuckle, feeling a wave of disappointment wash over me. Help you? I've already helped you too much. But helping doesn't mean letting you freeload forever. But he didn't get it. Instead, he pulled out his phone and immediately called our mother. Within minutes, my phone rang. I looked at the screen, Mom. I sighed, knowing this was about to be a tough conversation. What the hell are you doing? Mom's angry voice burst through the phone. He's your brother. How could you charge him rent? I gripped my phone, trying to stay calm. Mom, he's 25 years old. He's not a 5-year-old who needs to be taken care of. He has to take responsibility for his own life. Mom snapped back. But you're the older brother. It's your responsibility to take care of him. I let out a bitter laugh. Responsibility? So you want to support him forever? If you care so much, why don't you let him move in with you? Silence. I could almost hear her struggling to find a reasonable excuse, but she had none. Because deep down, she didn't want to take care of him either. Finally, she let out a defeated sigh, her voice softer. But, he's your brother. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Then you take care of him. If you don't want to, don't expect me to. Another silence. A silence that told me she had no argument left, because I was right. I returned to my brother's room. He had overheard the entire conversation. His eyes burned with anger, but there was also a hint of panic. He was realizing that he had no way out. He shouted one last time, like a child forced out of his comfort zone. "You're selfish. You're abandoning your family." I looked at him, completely unfazed. "No. I'm teaching you a life lesson." He clenched his fists, then suddenly ran into his room and slammed the door shut. The entire house shook from the impact. 1 week. He stayed silent for an entire week. No talking, no interaction, just locked away in his room, occasionally coming out for food. I had braced myself for a long battle. But then, one day, I came home from work and saw him sitting in front of his laptop, browsing job listings. I said nothing, just glanced at him before heading to my room. 2 weeks later, he got his first job. Nothing fancy, nothing high-paying, but at least, he was earning his own money. 1 month later, he handed me part of the rent. I took it without a word, just a nod. I never regretted pushing him out of his comfort zone. In fact, I felt relieved. My home was finally mine again. I no longer had to support a freeloader, and he was no longer one. He may not be happy about it, he may even resent me for a while. But that was his problem. What mattered was this: he had learned the most important lesson of his life: no one is responsible for supporting him forever. And me? I had finally reclaimed my freedom and fairness in my own home. Story 3. Karen called the cops because I was cooking. Something illegal? Have you ever encountered a Karen? If your answer is no, then congratulations, you're truly lucky. Unfortunately, I haven't been that fortunate, and after experiencing a rather nerve-wracking incident, I realized that sometimes, running into a Karen can turn an ordinary day into an endless drama-filled spectacle. Today, I'm going to tell you about a woman who, I'm convinced, sees herself as the self-proclaimed guardian of justice in our neighborhood. But in reality, all she does is meddle in other people's lives, looking for the most ridiculous reasons to exert power and impose her opinions on others. And can you guess the reason she decided to call the police? It wasn't because of a robbery, nor a loud argument, it was because I was cooking. Yes, you heard that right. Simply cooking in my own home was enough for her to feel the need to take action by calling the cops. But the story doesn't stop there. What happened next left me utterly unsure whether to laugh or cry. I live in a quiet residential neighborhood where people generally enjoy peace and relaxation after a long day. For me, my biggest joy after work is stepping into my kitchen, immersing myself in the world of spices and delicious home-cooked meals. I especially love making traditional dishes from my homeland, flavorful, rich, and sometimes a bit pungent, but always comforting and familiar. That evening, the sky was clear, and a gentle breeze carried the aromatic scent of my spiced stew throughout the house. The fragrance of cinnamon, star anise, ginger, and other distinctive ingredients filled my kitchen, seeping through the window and blending into the quiet neighborhood air. I was stirring my pot, fully enjoying this relaxing moment when... Knock! 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 A loud, impatient knocking yanked me out of my peaceful bubble. I wiped my hands, walked over to the door, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. And then... standing in front of me was a middle-aged woman, her meticulously styled blonde hair and crossed arms exuding annoyance. She wore a checkered dress, and her high heels tapped against the ground with an air of impatience. Her facial expression, eyebrows raised in judgment, lips pursed tightly, eyes sharp as knives, immediately told me exactly who I was dealing with, a full-fledged Karen. She scrunched up her face, as if she had just smelled something absolutely repulsive. Her eyes darted around, scanning my house before settling back on me with a look of disdain. Then, in the most irritated tone, she spat out. "What is that smell? I can't stand it. What are you cooking?" Her question carried no curiosity or politeness. It felt more like an accusation, like I had just committed a crime simply by cooking in my own home. I stood there, momentarily stunned, caught between confusion and annoyance. How should I respond? Explain? Argue? Or just shut the door and return to my dinner? But before I could decide, she did something that truly shocked me. I took a deep breath, forced a polite smile, and replied, "Oh, I'm making a traditional family stew. It might be a bit fragrant, but I promise it's delicious. I thought a calm explanation might de-escalate the situation, but the moment I finished speaking, I realized she did not care about my answer. Not one bit. Her face hardened, eyebrows furrowing so tightly they nearly touched. Her eyes widened in fury, as if I had just insulted the entire neighborhood's honor. Then, with no effort to restrain her anger, she jabbed a finger toward me and yelled, "You can't cook that here. This is an American neighborhood, no one eats that kind of thing." I froze. A cold shock ran down my spine. What? I was standing in my own house, in my own kitchen, cooking my own dinner, and yet someone had the audacity to knock on my door and tell me I wasn't allowed to do that? I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the irritation rising within me. I didn't want to start an argument, I just wanted to eat in peace. So I responded calmly. I don't think there's any law against cooking in my own home. But if the smell bothers you, I can close my window. A reasonable offer, right? A simple solution to avoid unnecessary conflict. But no, she didn't want a solution. She didn't want a compromise. She wanted a fight. I could see it in her eyes, that defiant gleam, as if she was waiting for me to snap, hoping I would retaliate, looking for any excuse to escalate things further. She took a deep breath, puffing up as if preparing for another dramatic outburst. And I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to end easily. She stomped her foot, her face turning red with anger, and then shouted as if she had just uncovered a massive criminal conspiracy. "I'm calling the police. You must be cooking something illegal." I blinked. Illegal? She actually thought I was breaking the law just because of a pot of stew? Before I could even react, she had already whipped out her phone, pressing buttons with exaggerated urgency, as if she were reporting a high-profile crime. I could hear her screeching into the phone. "Yes, you need to send the police right away. There's a horrible smell coming from my neighbor's house. I'm sure he's doing something illegal, maybe drug dealing. Or worse." I sighed, shaking my head. Surely, no one would actually send the cops over such a ridiculous call. But then... Wee-oo. Wee-oo. Minutes later, the unmistakable sound of police sirens echoed through the neighborhood. I glanced out my window and, oh my God. She really did it. 2 police officers stepped out of their patrol car, exchanging awkward glances, clearly unsure why they were even here. One of them, a tall and lanky man, approached my door, scratching his head in discomfort before asking, "We got a report about suspicious activity here. Can you tell us what's going on?" I nearly laughed but managed to keep my composure. I gestured toward my simmering pot, the rich aroma still filling the air, and casually replied, "I'm just cooking. If you'd like, you're welcome to come in and try some." The 2 officers exchanged looks before turning to Karen, who was still standing there, arms akimbo, chin lifted smugly, clearly expecting to see me dragged away in handcuffs. But what happened next was not what she was hoping for. One officer, seemingly the senior of the 2, sighed, crossed his arms, and said in the most exasperated tone imaginable, "Ma'am, cooking is not a crime. Please don't misuse emergency services." Her mouth fell open, her face draining of color. She looked as if someone had just dumped a bucket of cold water on her. But instead of accepting the reality, she clung to one last desperate hope. But the smell. It's making me uncomfortable. Can't you do anything about it?" Story 4, Karen called the cops on me for cooking. Illegally? Have you ever encountered a Karen? If not, congratulations, you're truly lucky. Unfortunately, I'm not as lucky, and after a rather nerve-wracking experience, I realized that sometimes, running into a Karen can turn an ordinary day into an endless drama movie. Today, I'll tell you about a woman who, I'm certain, believes she's the protector of justice in our neighborhood. In reality, though, all she does is intrude into other people's lives, looking for the most absurd reasons to exert power and impose her opinions on others. And can you guess what made her call the police? Not a burglary, not a major argument, but my cooking. That's right, you heard me. Simply the act of cooking in my own home was enough for her to feel the urgent need to take action by calling the police. But that's not even the craziest part. What happened next truly left me unsure whether to laugh or cry. I live in a quiet residential neighborhood where people usually enjoy peace and relaxation after a long day. As for me, my greatest joy after work is stepping into the kitchen, immersing myself in the world of spices and delicious dishes. I especially love cooking traditional dishes from my homeland, flavorful meals, sometimes a bit strong-smelling, but always warm and familiar. That evening, the sky was clear, and a gentle breeze carried the aroma of my simmering stew through the air. The rich scent of cinnamon, star anise, ginger, and other signature ingredients wafted through my kitchen, slipping through the window and mingling with the calm atmosphere of our little neighborhood. I was stirring the pot, completely content in my little cooking world when... Knock! 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 A loud, impatient knocking snapped me out of my peaceful moment. I wiped my hands, walked to the door, and wondered who could be visiting at this hour. And then, standing before me was a middle-aged woman, her perfectly styled blonde hair framing a face full of annoyance. She wore a plaid dress, her high heels tapping the ground in frustration. From the way her eyebrows arched judgmentally, her lips pressed into a tight line, and her eyes glared sharply, I knew exactly who I was dealing with, a classic Karen. She wrinkled her nose as if she had just inhaled the most awful stench imaginable. Her eyes darted around, scanning my home, before settling on me with a sneer. And then, in a voice dripping with irritation, she snapped. "What is that smell? I can't stand it. What on earth are you cooking?" Her question had no hint of curiosity or politeness, it was more of an accusation, as if I had just committed a crime by daring to cook in my own house. I was momentarily stunned, caught between disbelief and irritation. How should I respond? Explain? Argue? Or simply shut the door and continue my dinner? But before I could decide, she did something that completely shocked me. Trying to keep my composure, I smiled politely and said, "Oh, it's just a traditional family stew. It might be a bit aromatic, but I promise it's delicious." I thought a gentle explanation might ease the situation. But the moment I finished speaking, I realized she did not care at all. Her face darkened, her eyebrows furrowed so tightly they almost touched. Her eyes widened with outrage, as if I had just insulted the honor of the entire neighborhood. Then, completely dropping any pretense of civility, she jabbed a finger at me and shouted, "You can't cook that here. This is an American neighborhood, no one eats that stuff." I froze. A chill ran down my spine. What? I was standing inside my own home, in my own kitchen, cooking my own meal, and yet, this woman thought she had the right to tell me I couldn't? Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to escalate the situation, I just wanted to enjoy my dinner in peace. So I replied slowly, keeping my voice steady. "I don't think there's any law against cooking in my own home. But if the smell bothers you, I can close my window." A reasonable offer, right? A simple solution to avoid unnecessary conflict. But no, Karen didn't want a solution. She wanted a fight. I could see it in her eyes, that challenging look, as if she was daring me to get angry, as if she was itching for an excuse to blow this into something bigger. She stood her ground, arms crossed, taking a deep breath like she was preparing for another dramatic monologue. And I had a bad feeling this wasn't going to end quickly. Then, she stomped her foot, her face turning red with rage, and shrieked as if she had just uncovered a criminal conspiracy. "I'm calling the cops. You're definitely cooking something illegal." I blinked. Illegal? She seriously thought I was breaking the law because of a stew? Before I could even react, she whipped out her phone, dialing dramatically as if reporting a major crime. I could hear her screeching into the phone. "Yes, send the police immediately. There's a horrible smell coming from my neighbor's house. I'm sure he's doing something illegal, maybe drugs. Or worse." I sighed, shaking my head. No way the police would actually show up for something this ridiculous, right? But then... Whew. Whew. Minutes later, sirens blared through the neighborhood. I peeked out the window and, oh my God. She actually got the cops to come. 2 officers stepped out of their patrol car, exchanging confused glances. Clearly, they had no idea why they were even here. One of them, a tall, lanky guy, walked up to my door, scratching his head awkwardly before asking. "We got a report about suspicious activity here. Can you explain what's going on?" I almost burst out laughing but managed to stay composed. I simply gestured toward my perfectly normal pot of stew and said, "I'm just cooking. If you'd like, I can invite you in for a bowl." The officers exchanged glances, then turned to Karen, who was still standing there, arms akimbo, chin lifted, clearly expecting them to arrest me on the spot. But what happened next was not what she wanted. One officer, an older man, sighed deeply, crossing his arms. His tone was exhausted, as if he had dealt with too many ridiculous calls in his career. "Ma'am, cooking is not a crime. Please stop abusing emergency services." Her mouth fell open, her face twisting with rage. She looked like she might explode. But when she realized the police weren't on her side, she quickly switched tactics, pointing a dramatic finger at me and shrieking, "I'll sue you." Then, like a child denied candy, she huffed, spun around, and stormed off. The older officer shook his head, then turned back to me and, to my surprise, grinned. "Smells good. I wouldn't mind trying a bowl." And so, instead of getting arrested, I ended up having dinner with 2 police officers, who completely agreed that my stew was delicious. The moral of the story: this isn't just a funny encounter, it's a perfect example of how entitlement and prejudice can lead to unbelievably irrational behavior. Some people don't want solutions. They don't even want to be truly affected, they just want control. But in the end, she made a fool of herself. So remember, keep calm, cook your food, and never let a Karen ruin your day.